Just notice if there's a rush to get it going, to get it started, or however it might be presenting itself to you. And instead, can you slow things down? And instead of placing your attention on your anchor right away, you might listen into the body and notice what the body and the heart and the mind want in order to settle more fully right now. So it could be looking around the room, maybe grabbing that extra blanket or cushion. It could be breathing more deeply and exhaling with a few sighs. So tune in and then indulge yourself. Go ahead and do whatever it is you need. And then eventually turning your gaze downward or closing the eyes. And then checking in with yourself. How is my body? How is my heart? How is my mind right now? And I'll be guiding a practice this evening, but it's very possible that given how the body, heart, and mind are, you might need something else. Maybe hands to the body, maybe reciting loving kindness phrases. And that's totally fine, in which case you can tune me out for the duration of the meditation and really tend to yourself. As we continue this subtle practice of arriving and settling, begin to notice simply how much settling is available to you this evening. Even though you may want and even yearn for deep settling, because of various causes and conditions, maybe only a little settling is available, or a medium amount. So noticing what feels available for you right now, at least, as a way to not fight it, but to honor what's here. And if you're open to it, you might intentionally bring to mind any parts of yourself that you habitually leave out of your practice. Maybe parts of your identity, parts of your way of being. And for whatever reason, you have historically left that part out of practice. And if possible, for this practice, at least you can try on welcoming that part in. Part that has often felt unwelcome. And you might bring that part of yourself to mind. And you say to yourself, I welcome you. Or I have the intention to one day eventually welcome you. Relax. Relax the body. Relax into your support. Relax your heart and mind. Relax your effort. And relax any expectations you have about yourself or your practice, at least for now. In a relaxed and spacious way, gather your heart and mind around an anchor, if you haven't done so already. Can you be with your anchor like you would be with a good friend, with care, curiosity, ease? And in turn, however you're practicing, can you be with yourself like a good friend, with care, curiosity, and ease. Including when moments could be neutral or unpleasant, as well as pleasant. And invite the body, the heart, and mind to relax. It may have tensed up, or you're inviting a new level of relaxation here. And this ease and relaxation is really so we can get out of our own way and allow these inherent qualities like awareness, like compassion or loving kindness to arise more easily to the surface. notice your mind has wandered, you might practice saying, "Thank you for returning." Because actually, in the very moment we notice that the mind has wandered, there's awareness there. Mindfulness has returned. If you take on this practice, which can simply be, "Thank you for returning." Thank you for returning. Anytime you notice how that might change your inner landscape, whether more pleasant, less pleasant, neutral. Thank you for returning. The few minutes that remain, you can continue practicing as you are if you like. Or you might relax even further by letting go of any sort of practice. Simply rest here. And it's okay if the mind wanders, because awareness will return. Spending these last few minutes with nothing to do, nowhere to go, no one to be, just resting. And lift your gaze or blink the eyes open. And close your practice in any way that feels supportive or part of your ritual. Thank you for your practice. So we'll take a short break of about 5 minutes or so. So bio, tea, stretch break, whatever you need. And I'll meet you back here at 35 past. So now it's a 4-minute break. I'll see you here in a few minutes.
Hello, hello. Were y'all in here? Well, hello, everyone. My name's Adam Stonebreaker, if we haven't met yet. Hi, Zoomers. I see you. And I'm the guiding teacher here at Mountain Stream Meditation. And I'd like to welcome Dawn Maurizio. Where'd you go? Oh, there she is. Beaming in all the way from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And Dawn is a Dharma teacher, meditation teacher, an author, a comedian. Oh no, where'd she go? Everyone disappeared on Zoom. Oh, there she is. Look. Okay. And she teaches all over the United States and Canada for organizations like Spirit Rock and True North Insight and 10% Happier and many other things. She's teaching all the time. But to me, she's a teaching partner, a practice partner. She's been a mentor for me. And most importantly, she's been a really wonderful friend, a really beautiful friend, advice giver. I love Dawn's Dharma. It's practical, it's modern, it's compassionate, but it's also rooted in a really deep practice and really deep Dharma. So I'm looking forward to hearing her talk tonight. And thank you for staying up late for us. I know what it's like. That's the East
Yeah,
Coasters.
yeah. I don't know if you
All
can
right.
see you're an East Coaster anymore, Adam.
Well, I mean, 40 something years on the East Coast. We'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
Well, welcome. I'll hand it over to Dawn. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's just a joy to get to know Adam's new home base. As Adam alluded, we're dear friends, and it's so interesting whenever Adam goes on retreat, the practitioner part of me celebrates, has a lot of mudita for him, but then the other part of me just is like, oh, well, who am I gonna message all day long about anything and everything? And so I always rejoice doubly so when Adam gets back from retreat. So thank you for being here. Um, as I said, I just really appreciate being able to beam in and share some Dharma reflections. I think it's just such a gift to be able to do. And if I wasn't doing this right now, staying up almost past my bedtime, this is my wind down time. It's almost 9:40 here. I don't know, maybe be scrolling or something like that, taking out the trash, except now I have an excuse, so I'm not doing that because I'm here with you. But all this to say, it's just a pleasure and a privilege to be able to reflect on Dhamma anytime, and especially with other fellows on the path, seekers on the path. And so when I tell you what I want to talk about this evening, my invitation first is just to tune into what might arise for you. And in particular, maybe around Vedana, feeling tone, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So this evening, I want to talk to you about mindfulness. And then noticing what might arise. It could be something like, oh my God, I've heard hundreds of talks on mindfulness. Or it's like, I know this like the back of my hand. Or what are the deep teachings or something like that, you know? Um, and that's welcome, of course. As well as, something that I realized for myself, having been on this path for a while, I really appreciate going back to basics. However, I don't feel like anything in the teachings are actually basic. I just think that when I first come across them, I might only understand them at a certain level. And then each time I revisit them, I don't even need to bring a beginner's mind to it because there's just like more that I don't know. And then even more and even more. And it's one of the gifts of this practice. When I first started actually practicing, I didn't think that was a gift. I was very much like a box ticker. I like getting things done, perfectionist, stuff like that. And so whenever I came across a teaching or a quality in the practice, I just want to tick it off like, okay, yeah, study that next. What's the next quality? And so I found that, the spiral approach, like coming back around, going deeper each time, almost overwhelming. But now I just really, really appreciate it. And so it's with that mindset, perhaps I invite you to embody. Could be beginner's mind if you resonate with that terminology, or just this like revisiting, coming back around, what might be new for you. And then maybe before I even start sharing, to reflect even further on, what is mindfulness to you at this point, however long or short you've been practicing. How has your relationship with mindfulness developed over time? How has it transformed you? How was it easy or difficult? For me, I found this practice more formally 19 years ago when I was backpacking through Southeast Asia on my quarter life crisis. And it was certainly up until that point the hardest thing I had done. I remember I just kind of heard, through the backpacker whispers, just like, this monastery. And so I went, but I didn't have much information other than go there. And then so I arrive and I say, I want to do a retreat. What I didn't realize is they take your passport at the reception desk. So they took my passport and then they handed me like this kind of package. And in the package, it was all white clothes. And so everyone was encouraged to not wear our usual clothes, but to wear all white when we were at the retreat at the monastery. And then I was led to my kuti, my little hut, and it was like sleeping on the floor on the thin mat. And all I had as furniture, in air quotes, was a calendar of the king and a plastic chair. For those of you who have been to Thailand, that's like the calendar of the king is very normal. And it was extremely challenging. It was a 10-day retreat, but it was so hard for me. It was the first time I was spending any time turning inward. And it was to the point where, maybe around day 5 or 6, I was like trying to figure out how can I get my passport? How can I trick them to giving my passport so I could escape in the middle of the night? And it didn't work. But I had told myself, and I really do believe that if I was able to leave early, there was a part of me that, even though it was challenging, that knew deep down that this would be part of my life for, from then on. And I think it was really rooted in this, what felt revolutionary, what felt so different from anything I had come across up until then and until now, which was turning inward and looking at our mind or my mind, training it, and then realizing as well that I had some agency over my attention and that I could attune deeply to my heart and then from there, eventually the nature of experience. Adam and I, we share a couple teachers, Tanisra and Kittasaro, And their teacher, Ajahn Chah, Thai forest master, would call this practice, or would liken it to walking into a hurricane. And that really resonates for me, because as I said, my practice has never been easy for me. There have been moments, of course, of ease, but just generally speaking, we call this practice a purification practice. And sometimes when I'd open one eye and look around the meditation hall, everyone seemed like they were so peaceful, like they were being hand washed with like special soap in warm water. That's like the purification I thought they had, while I was like stuck on the spin cycle. And so, given that that's sometimes our experience, or that Ajahn Chah would liken it as walking into a hurricane, it's like, why would we? Why does anyone do this? And I think because we start touching into this possibility, this freedom, that by turning inward, we can understand the winds that might otherwise push and pull us, and that we might start to see others or recognize in ourselves that we have strategized our lives by this pushing and pulling. But instead, we can be grounded, we could be centered, we could be steadfast, unshakable, despite the push and pull, despite the winds. And even though it's not always pleasant, I think it's a lot more a place I'd rather be, basically. And what I also appreciate about this quality of mindfulness is that we don't need to go away on retreat to deepen and cultivate this quality, but that it could be done right where we are, as a lot of us know. And that it could really lead in our daily lives or in our relationships to more ease, more freedom, more steadiness of the heart and mind. I also teach mindfulness in addition to Buddha Dharma. But whenever I teach in mindfulness or more secular settings, the way that I teach it is that I let people know that it's really just the starting point. It's the foundation of so much. And then I tell people, especially those who listen, that they could live, or you could live a satisfactory life with just knowing mindfulness techniques. But you could lead an enriched life knowing the deeper teachings or touching into the wisdom. And it's kind of like, why not? Why wouldn't you? One of the challenges, though, when I do say that, if someone, at a social gathering, they might say, what do you do? And if I say I teach meditation, and then if they ask what, I don't always say insight or Buddhist meditation. I might say mindfulness just to shorthand it. But I also sometimes feel misunderstood when I say that. And anyone who, maybe if you're not a teacher, if you've been asked what kind of meditation you do, and if you've also shorthanded it as mindfulness meditation, you might have felt something similar, where it has become so mainstream, this buzzword, even commercialized and commodified, that it doesn't, do your practice justice. That this word mindfulness is used in so many ways that sells all sorts of things that say the Buddha could not have ever imagined. But instead, it's like packaged as such because of this word mindfulness. And that when any word gets overused, it often loses its depth and the subtlety of its original meaning, and can get disconnected from its original purpose. And so just so that we're on the same page, to come to maybe define, what are we talking about here when I say right so mindfulness is what I've been saying so far, but really what I'm pointing to is right or wise mindfulness. So samma sati. And those are the Pali words for it, Pali. I always say that, especially when I'm on Zoom, and I think there's a transcript, because Zoom always writes Polly as if it's a person, Polly, whenever I say Polly as in the language, but anyways. And so what makes anything like mindfulness? So this is coming from the Eightfold Path in particular. So what makes any path factor right or wise is how it's developed and supported by the other path factors. And often it's wise or right view that's usually not, I don't want to say the start of the path, but a lot of times it is in books and stuff, it's listed as the first one. And if we think of wise view, we could maybe imagine instead that we're standing on the top of a mountain and that wherever we're looking, that's our view. And so wise view pertains to how we might orient ourselves, what we pay attention to, what we attend to in our lives. And then if we make it practice oriented in particular, it's taking that image, applying it to the Buddhist teachings and recognizing that it's what we're orienting toward. And so in these teachings in particular, we're orienting ourselves towards suffering and the freedom from suffering. And so that's the orientation of this path. And it's in that sense that wise view makes sure any of the path factors, including wise mindfulness, developed in the service of freedom. As well as I want to make this distinction that between, say, mainstream mindfulness and wise mindfulness. And in both, the main, well, I don't want to say in both. In mainstream mindfulness, the main instruction is to be with our experience exactly as it is, without judging it, without trying to change it in any way. And while this is an aspect of wise mindfulness, I think the difference is we need to discern, or in wise mindfulness, there's the discernment piece of if what we're experiencing is leading to freedom or not. Is it beneficial? Is it harmful? Is it skillful, unskillful, wholesome, unwholesome? And then this relates to another Eightfold Path factor, wise effort, because when we bring in wise effort, it helps us to reduce the unskillful mental qualities and to deepen the skillful qualities instead. And so all of that takes effort. And so in a way, there's the effort to remember to be mindful in the first place. That this practice in so many ways is easy, but it's remembering to be mindful that's the hard part. And as I mentioned, sati, S-A-T-I, is the Pali word for mindfulness, or that at least is used to translate mindfulness. And it has a literal meaning of remembering or recollecting. And it's not so much about remembering the past, but rather to remember to be present. And what I like about this idea of remembering or even recollecting, like those two translations, is that it's this bringing together or coming together. Or in the beginning of my meditation, I said, if there are any parts of yourself that you've often left out of practice, which I have done for many, many years, by bringing all of our parts into practice and welcoming them, it's almost like we're moving from dismemberment to rememberment. You know, this, again, this recollecting. And so this sense of gathering, this unification, this collecting back together from our perhaps more distracted state, scattered state, and so on. And so in a way, this practice leads to one of integrity and wholeness. And when we're mindful of that, then it could be subtly pleasant, which then motivates us to practice more. And then it's like this wholesome cycle that feeds itself. And then another part of how, say, wise mindfulness, samasati, can be different from mainstream mindfulness, or rather, this aspect of recollecting can be interpreted is that it could be more this remembering the Buddhist teachings. So this recollection of the Buddhist teachings. And that if we keep this framework of the teachings in mind, and so I could simplify that to mean if we keep the aspiration to practice with for the benefit of all beings, so that all beings can experience a freedom from suffering. If we can keep that at the forefront, even when we're present with our experience, while also knowing say something like the three characteristics that gets revealed. So it's not permanent, it's not perfect, it's not personal. And that paraphrasing of the three characteristics in a more traditional manner that of anicca, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and anatta, not self, that it's not permanent, not perfect, not personal, comes from Ruth King. I really like that, the 3 Ps. And so in the Buddhist teachings, though, mindfulness alone is not enough. Some of you might recognize that book title from Burmese teacher Sayadaw U Tejaniya, Mindfulness Alone is Not Enough. And that's why when I teach in more mainstream mindfulness places, I kind of, tell them it's just the beginning. I don't say it's not enough what you're doing here, because it could feel already like a lot, and I honor that. But in the Buddhist teachings, mindfulness is often paired with other qualities. In particular, with this quality of clear comprehension, sampajanya. And so you might have heard this kind of the compound word, sati sampajanya. And that's literally mindfulness and clear comprehension. Where mindfulness is, how I define it, it's this quality of attention that we bring to the present moment that doesn't have judgment, that's kind and curious. And more formally, it's this, we're trying to bring this bare attention to the moment. And so basically, sati sampajanya is adding to the bare awareness, this element of understanding. Needing to know not only what we're doing as we're doing it, but also things like the underlying motivation that we're doing it with. So the intention, the purpose that we're doing it with, whether it's skillful or unskillful. Is it leading to harm or to benefit for yourself and others now and in the future? One of the tasks of samasati is to clarify the mind, to shine a light on our experience so that we can be with an experience in its pure form, its bare or naked expression. But as a result, or in addition to, mindfulness can also really challenge our conditioning of doing. The way that I had invited you to practice was, at one point I had invited you to say, thank you for returning. And that was in reference to when our mind wandered and then it returns and we kind of snap out of it. Someone coughs and then we realize our mind was wandering or something like that. And before, at least for me, I would get mad at myself. It's like, gosh, you had one job to focus on the breath and you keep wandering. And then, and I would just be so hard on myself. But then I forget who told me this, but it was such a game changer for me that I don't notice the moment my mind wanders because it's off. It's dreaming, it's fantasizing, it's creating stories. But instead, what we're noticing is awareness returning. And so instead of being so hard on myself, I would just celebrate awareness returning. Like, thank you, you didn't abandon me. You're still here. You came back for me. And that totally changed my inner landscape and my motivation to practice, to cultivate this awareness. And the fact that awareness returned regardless. Sometimes it took longer, sometimes it went away more often, but it always returned, just made me realize that I didn't have to work so hard in my practice, but that it would return. And so that's why in the practice, I really emphasize, or these years, my practice is really one of like, can I bring more ease? Can I undo doing in my practice so that it's almost like I'm getting out of my way and that these qualities that are already there can come up to the surface. And so in this way, mindfulness can really challenge our conditioning that capitalism has drilled into us, this one of doing. A lot of times when I teach retreats or even classes or workshops, I get questions like, so the goal is this, or what should I be striving for? Or when I started loving kindness practice, I would say I'm working on trying to be more loving and kind. And in each one of those, there's a little bit of grasping or rigidity or tension or contraction. But if we're to allow mindfulness to be mindfulnessing, to allow it to be itself, it asks us to undo instead of do. And so maybe you know this more immediately as, we try not to think, not to judge, not associate, etc. And then eventually the way that I see it, it's this like leaning back and not getting in the way so it can come to the surface. And that's why I also, toward the end of the practice, I said, can you just rest here? Like stop practicing, just be in this space. And then in that space, a lot of times we're more mindful than we realize. And then again, that helps to prove the point that we don't need to do as much. But just a little disclaimer that it's really normal at the start of our practice that we do need to do doing. We need to bring more doing into our practice because we're learning something new. So anything that we're learning new does take more effort, whether it's a new language, a new instrument, etc. But at least for me, when I got to a point where I didn't need to do as much, I didn't know how to be anything else in my practice. So it actually was really scary for me to try to do less. And then that's when, teachers and mentors were really helpful. But I remember when I was continuously being encouraged to do less. And it first showed up because the way that I started practicing on that monastery, and for many years after, it was with a lot of mental noting. And so there was no space almost for anything else to arise in my practice because every moment was filled with a mental note, a mental label. And so when I was finally trying to mentally note less, but even just like 60% less or 70%, not like zero, it was so terrifying. I felt like I was being thrown into the middle of the pool all of a sudden, or into the deep end. And so I was scrambling and I wanted to continue mental noting, and that was like grabbing the side of the pool or something like that. But at some point, there was just this relaxation, but it was more like a surrendering because I was just like, I can't figure this out. And so there was this surrendering. And then I realized actually I could swim. I was like looking for a safe, like a lifesaver when I didn't need to splash about as much and it was there. What I also appreciate with this quality of samasati is that it could help with both the cultivation of serenity and insight. And so it can lead to either deep concentration or wisdom, depending on the mode in which it is applied. And so I read that recently in Bhikkhu Bodhi's Noble Eightfold Path book, and I reread that book every so often because, again, I just find there's like always new nuggets in there for me. And I could swear this is the first time I ever read this, but I highlighted it. So obviously not, but it felt like it was the first time. And so what I appreciate with relearning that is that it's just this like really refined tool in a way, or it's like a Swiss Army knife that has all of these extra uses or something like that. And so for samasati to lead to the stages of serenity, what we can do is keep our attention on an object and free and as best we can, free from straying. So we try to keep it as much as we can on an object. And then mindfulness serves as this guard responsible for making sure that the mind doesn't slip away. But at the same time, mindfulness can watch the mind to see what arises in the mind, like if there's hindrances or unskillful mind states. So it has like this double duty there. And then in order to lead to insight and realization or deepening for wisdom, mindfulness, its task is to observe, to note, to discern phenomena with precision until their fundamental characteristics reveal themselves. And one example of what are the fundamental characteristics? Well, it's the three characteristics again. It's not permanent, it's not perfect, it's not personal. And again, to bring it back to the Eightfold Path, this is wise effort, once again. I think the mind without mindfulness is like muddy water stirred up. And so it's like kind of just really agitated. And that agitation is just our daily life. It's all of the distractions, all of our to-dos and et cetera, et cetera. But when we stop stirring or agitating it, which is what a lot of us do with our practice, slowing down and stopping, well, eventually that dirt sinks to the bottom. And again, we don't have to make the dirt sink to the bottom. It does. And so I really feel when I have the time and space to observe what goes on inside of me, that there's also this gravitational pull that pulls our mind to settle as well. So the same thing exists within us. The way to cultivate this quality more formally is through the four foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana Sutta. The first foundation, mindfulness of the body. Second, mindfulness of feeling tone or Vedana. The third, Chitta, of the heart and mind. And the fourth, Dhamma, some of the universal teachings like the three characteristics or the hindrances or Four Noble Truths, etc. I'm not going to go into that too much because I do want to hear from you and see if there are any questions or comments or whatnot. But the one thing I do want to point out with the Satipatthana Sutta is that there's this part called the refrain that is repeated 16 times, 1-6. And I'll read it now, but just so that you know, in the sutta itself, it'll say the refrain with just body. And then the next time or another time, it'll say feeling tone. And then a little later, mind, and a little later, dhammas. But I'm going to, when I recite it or say it right now, I'll say body, feeling tone, mind, dhammas, just for the sake of time. And so the refrain goes like this. In this way, they abide contemplating the body, feeling tone, mind, dhammas internally. Or they abide contemplating the body, feeling tone, mind, dhammas externally. Or they abide contemplating the body, feelings, mind, dhammas, both internally and externally. And so just wanting to take a couple moments to unpack that just really briefly. But if our overall aspiration with this practice is the end of suffering and the causes of suffering, then what we want to see clearly is the effects of our behavior, both internally, externally, and both. And so when I say effects, we could, paraphrase that as impact. And we want to see the impact of our behavior. And so the internal piece is just our internal landscape. How is it what we do or say? How does that impact me internally? And then externally, it's our relationship with others, people, plants, animals, the culture, the planet. And then for the both internally and externally, it's around, I interpret it as our individual and collective engagement in social, environmental, and political justice issues or concerns. That basically this teaching wasn't meant for us to just, stay on our little zabutons and then hope somehow that everything got fixed out there by closing my eyes and turning inward. But rather it's inviting us to inhabit this world that we're all connected to. And Adam's Zen teacher, Dai Gak, had said, and I remember Adam said this in a, gosh, it must have been like 2 or 3 years ago in a talk I heard from him. But this teacher said, eventually our practice takes a hairpin turn and begins to be focused on others. And so I think that is a beautiful evolution. And I think in that same talk, I heard Adam say the outward expression reflects the inner transformation. The outward expression reflects the inner transformation. And so, yeah, if this is something that you want to contemplate a little further, whether it's journaling, whether it's discussing in Sangha, even if it's a Sangha of one other person or more, one of the things that I like to do whenever I bring my attention back to this teaching is to bring to mind, right now, whenever it is I'm doing the reflection, right now, which one feels like I'm spending more time on? Am I spending more time on the internal impacts or the external impacts or both internal and external? What's getting in the way of me from spending more time focusing on the others? Is it resistance or fear, or is it, simply because it's what I need right now? And then maybe another question could be, how can I bring some sort of balance to the three? And I say some sort of balance because it's not going to be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's going to fluctuate, but some sort of balance. Because I think that's, again, this wholeness, this integrity that I mentioned earlier, when there's some representation of the three as opposed to 0% that and more of these two or whatever. Yeah. So that's all I have to share. And I'm just noticing this urge of like, don't you have something pithy and like, can you tie a nice tidy bow around this talk? But we might be here for a while, so I'll leave it at that. And as I said, I want to make some time if there are any questions, comments, shares, celebrations. Yeah.
Wow, thank you, Dawn, so much for that
I
beautiful talk.
quoted you. I quoted
Yeah.
you, Adam.
You mentioned me twice, so
Yeah.
I was keeping score. So if you're on Zoom, you can raise your Zoom hand or get the attention of Robin, who's watching the Zoom in some way. Or in the hall here, if you have any questions or comments or extra insights, I have the mic and I'll give it to you to share if you'd like to. Okay. You can say your name and then ask your question.
Thank you. I'm Robert. Thanks, Don. When you were talking about mindfulness and the kind of the populist interpretation and maybe a deeper, raw Buddhist approach, and in the latter, you had mentioned about discernment of, discernment in that. And a little bit later, you talked about, stirring the muddy glass of water.
Mhm.
But in that discernment part, it feels like when I do that, I'm just spinning the muddy water more.
Yeah.
And kind of separating myself from the insight
Yeah.
part of things. So how to navigate that would be helpful.
Yeah. Love that question. So my experience with this quality and like discernment is maybe one of my favorite qualities in the teachings, except it gets no airtime. I find it's like not as sexy as like loving kindness or whatever. But I really love discernment because I feel like for me, at least, a lot of freedom has unfolded from there. However, my discernment really came from slowing down and listening, turning inward and listening, which is different from, and I notice this comes from when I want to rush the decision or the discernment. So when I'm like, is it this or this? And like I'm putting some sort of pressure on myself to know sooner than maybe I'm ready. Um, so there's that distinction. Um, and at the same time, when we're able to start seeing that we're getting caught in maybe wanting to rush a decision and we're able to slow ourselves down still and open ourselves up to discernment, maybe it's like, is this skillful or is that more skillful, etc. We will make mistakes. It's not as if once we start embodying discernment that we get all of our decisions right from there on. But this is where the quality of mindfulness can be really helpful. We choose in any given moment as wisely as is possible, and then we continue to pay attention. We pay attention to the impact, whether internally, externally, or both. And then depending on the impact, how can that feed into our learning so that we can maybe recalibrate our actions or our intentions or whatever it is, so that the next time this similar situation arises, we might choose differently. But to really, yeah, to be kind throughout the process, to not rush, even if we, um, sometimes the rushing comes from a wholesome place, not wanting to suffer, wanting to, or out of care for others or ourselves. However, when we rush, as you're mentioning, often it can feel like stirring up the water. And you didn't actually say that you rushed the decisions. That's just me speaking from my experience. But that's how I would maybe, yeah, make that distinction between the two. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I just couldn't see if you were like nodding or making other faces. So, so thanks for that verbal cue.
He was nodding.
Thanks.
For those of you on Zoom, if you would like to share a comment or ask a question, you can just use the reactions and raise your hand. Or if your camera is
Oh, you went back to mute by accident, Robin, but
right. I was a little too fast. It said, or if I see you on, if your video is on, you can just wave and I can grab a hold of you. Thank you, Dawn.
yeah, because if your camera's off and you're waving, we won't know.
This is Randall. I have a question.
Sorry.
Don, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Adam, thanks so much for all that you're doing for us. We're so happy that you're here. Don, can you just speak about the process of naming during sitting practice?
Yeah.
Your experience with it. I know it's something that I've used for many, many years and have found it very helpful, but it's always great to hear from a teacher your own experience of the process of naming and how maybe it's evolved or
Yeah.
helped in your practice. Thank you. Thanks for being here again.
Yeah, thanks, Randall. So my mental noting, I wasn't given much instruction around it. So if anyone has practiced in Asia, you might have had a similar experience where we see a teacher for 5 minutes a day, and then we're kind of off to our own devices, and then that's our only check-in once a day for 5 minutes. And so my first retreat, I was told, just, when the breath goes in, say rising, and when the breath goes out, say falling. And then as the days went on, it was at this monastery in particular, we worked with touch points. And even though we didn't actually touch the points in our body, we brought our attention there and we would say rising, falling, touching, rising, falling, touching. And then We had 28 touch points, and if we forgot where we were, we had to start over, basically. What I wasn't told, or however, how I practice, I would say, you know, almost like rising, falling, touching. It was like I was yelling it. And then, but then now that, well, took a lot of effort, well, first of all, but also, I think in that very act of like somehow yelling it, yes, it did take up all my attention, but it really didn't leave me room for when, say, sadness was also present, or grief or joy. And so over the years, when I continued mental noting, and I still tell folks this whenever they ask me about it, I tell them, you know, don't do what I do and practice with the volume down. You know, like say the volume goes to 10. I was doing 8, 9, 10 on 10 for volume. Practice with the 2 on 10 so that you can still be present for the experience of it. I didn't get that instruction for many years. But now being on, you know, part of the Dharma world, you know, I hear it a lot. And so you might already know that, that Randall. Other ways that my practice around mental noting has evolved is that sometimes there could be a lot more space. When I first learned, we always had to note things 3 times, like thinking, thinking, thinking. I don't know why. And I know so many of us do that, but I haven't found out why. So if someone knows, please tell me. But instead, in addition to having it be on low volume, I might say it only once so that I could be with the embodied experience of the thinking or the hearing. And the way that I experience the embodiment of it, it's just like, what vibrations are there that are resonating from this sound or this thought, or by tuning into that sensation. And then another way that it has evolved is that it almost feels like less verbal. There's this recognition that a thought is there, because I think now I've gotten so familiar with the embodiment of some of these phenomena because I turned it down and I repeated, and I only mentally noted once instead of 3. And so now I might feel the sound instead of needing to mentally note the sound. But the way of practicing is still very similar, but it just feels like there's a much lighter touch to it. So that it stays experiential, basically. Yeah, so those are some of the ways.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And I'm also taking something new from this, which is around the feeling tone in naming, like thinking, planning,
Mhm.
to bring more mindfulness to the actual feeling tone of that, of what it is I'm naming. So I really appreciate that as a reminder. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so happy that that's also what you're taking out of it, because how we practice is almost what leads us to freedom, not what we're focusing on. You know, like the object itself isn't inherently freeing, but I think it's how we practice that really leads us there. When I was practicing in this way with the heavily mental noting, and I was like practicing 4 hours a day, and I was going on retreats as much as I could. I was like in between jobs, let's say, quarter life crisis. So I had time. But I remember my partner at that time and my mom, they had this intervention with me because they said something like, you know, you're doing all this meditation. We don't know much about meditation, but like, you're so mean. You're so impatient. Like, we don't think that that's what's supposed to happen. And I got defensive and I was like, you don't know. But then later I realized it's because I was doing so much mental noting with like this hardness. And it was like I was playing whack-a-mole basically over and over, that when the timer went off, or what I didn't realize during my practice was that I was holding myself to this high standard of like needing to be on top of every mental note. And I was judging myself for when the mind wandered, that when my timer went off, I was holding others, especially those closest to me, to that same standard. I was like being just as rigid or hard with them and expecting a lot of them. And so in addition to cultivating mindfulness and some concentration, there was also this part that was getting cultivated. And it was that realization that really changed how I started practicing. So that's when I started lowering the volume, saying it less, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm happy that you're saving yourself a few years and you're picking that up now, basically, from my talk. I don't know if we have room for one more. I'll let Adam and Robin decide.
Yeah, we have a question here in the room. So
Okay.
Hi. Okay, I'll keep this question quick. So I just came out of a spiritual community with a lot of mindfulness practice for 5 years, and I wonder, how do you prevent like a rigorous mindfulness practice from killing spontaneity in yourself? And also, how do you keep mindfulness from becoming a form of self-consciousness?
So that last one, how can I keep mindfulness from becoming a form of self-consciousness? Can you say more about that one?
Um, Well, mindfulness seems to be so full of watching yourself, right? And
Mhm,
and if you, when you were talking about the sati samapajana, right?
mhm.
You're looking at your motivations, and when you go deep, you can see there's some nasty
Yeah,
things in there, and as the deeper you look, the more dirt you find. And
yeah,
then the looking just becomes like uh it can become very distorted.
yeah. Thank you for that. So a few things that I'm like looking at the clock. I'll try and be effective with my response. One of the things is that when I turn inward, I've learned quite naturally, but now I'm also doing some additional trainings around, say, somatic therapy, where I'm starting to come across more formally parts work. But I was doing parts work unknowingly in my meditation practice already, which was um, when I would uncover deep, deeply seated parts of myself. At first, I was pretty hateful and judgmental toward those parts, but eventually my practice transformed so that I became loving and tender to those parts, and that I didn't try to change them. I didn't realize that earlier in my mindfulness practice or my Buddhist practice that it was like a self-improvement project. And so just I started tending to them with care, um, and friendliness and love when that was available. And then the watching yourself around. So I just took a few notes. And so I know you said more around the watching yourself, but the way that I see this practice, it's not just watching myself, but it's also observing how life is coming alive in me and around me. And so it's not so self-centered. And I'm not meaning self-centered in that derogatory way, but it's not only focused on the self. Um, However, when we do focus on the self, sometimes the rigorous mindfulness practice can get in the way, ironically. And so it's this balance between turning inward, but also receiving. And so there's one time where planning was coming up a lot on one of my retreats, and it just wouldn't go away. And so instead of just saying planning, planning, planning for days on end, I decided, okay, let me turn inward and see what's like the planning making machine right now, what's underneath. And there was a little bit of that pleasantness of just like, I'm on top of all these details. And then there was also like, I take care of myself and everyone around me. So it was still pleasant, but then it started transforming into unpleasantness, which I wouldn't have expected, you know? So again, that's just how it unfolds naturally. So that's what we're watching in a way. And then in the unpleasantness, it was just like wanting to control. And then it turned into, well, if I control, then I and everyone I care about won't get hurt. And then from there it turned into tending to the part of myself that was so afraid of getting hurt, and being kind to her and recognizing the care that that part had for wanting to protect others too. And then in that way, by kind of turning inwards, but at the same time allowing ourselves to be surprised, that's another way that I reframe what we're doing when we try to be mindful in daily life or in our practice. We're trying to make space to be surprised. And so in that sense, we can be mindful without it killing spontaneity. So you said rigorous practice. I would maybe, like I was telling Randall a few minutes ago, turn down the intensity on the effort. Trust in your mindfulness that it's already there. It doesn't need to be more rigorous, but that it's already there. And then let it surprise you. What will you notice? Because sometimes with rigorous practice, we're looking down this like paper tube because we think we know what we're looking for, but we're not seeing all of the ways practice is unfolding outside of that paper tube, basically. Yeah, so hopefully that
so
was,
much.
yeah, thank you. Okay, so whether you like to close your eyes or place your hands together or not for our dedication, it's really fine. May our intention be sincere. May our loving kindness be boundless. May our wisdom be deep. And may our practice and presence benefit all beings without exception, oppressing none, exploiting none, and promoting the causes of true happiness, well-being, safety, and sustainability for all. Thank you, everyone.